Greetings, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this special edition of Rootwork here on the Rootwork and Black Liberation Media channels. It's a special edition because every Tuesday, if not the first Tuesday, a second Tuesday, but on Tuesdays every month, we're doing a special in conjunction with Cooperation Jackson. We are presenting the Build and Fight formula. And we do that. We go through this series of steps showcasing what the Build and Fight formula is with its primary architect, Kali Akuno, co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi. Welcome to the show, Brother Kali.
Good to be back for what's this, episode 5 of the run.
Number 5.
We really got a special treat tonight, and for those who'll be watching this video or listening to it on other venues afterwards, for those of you who may be listening, I would definitely encourage you to check us out at Jackson Rising and Black Liberation Media, because you will want to see the visuals and want to check out what Blair is putting down. So definitely check it out and sit back and enjoy. Open your mind, listen, and learn. There may be some things you will be challenged with. I'm going to say that off the top. I know myself, as we get into it, in my early days of learning about digital fabrication, I'll put it out here now because I know Blair will be dealing with it a bit later, about this method of production being something that will be used to replace Black labor in particular. And so I had a serious kind of fear and consternation towards it, but it was Blair who really changed my particular perspective and worldview on it. And I'm quite sure he's going to do the same for many of you all tonight. So definitely happy to have Brother Blair Evans with us with Insight Focus for y'all to really get a deep understanding of what community production is and how it not only relates to this build and fight formula we've been trying to put out there, but how it's a central piece. I would say perhaps the most transformative piece to it. So, I'm gonna we'll lay it out. Y'all in for a treat.
So, Brother Kali is referring to Blair Evans, who is a special guest presenter on tonight's show, the Build and Fight formula, specifically around the area of community production. Let's bring Blair on now. Thank you so much for joining us, Blair.
Glad to be here.
Currently a resident of Idlewild, Michigan. That is Michigan, is it not? Blair Evans is a leader in the People's Network for Land and Liberation and is a principal representative of the Idlewild node of the consortium and serves on several local and county boards in planning and development. Blair is a member of the board of the FAB Foundation and is founder and director of Insight Focus, a production and training lab focused on relationships between digital fabrication, permaculture, experiential learning, and appropriate technology. As I was saying to you, Blair, backstage, I abbreviated heavily your bio. He's a bunch of other things and doing a bunch of other things. Hopefully he will get into that more as we talk this evening. So again, thank you, Blair, for being on the show.
It's an honor.
Now, in the beginnings, when we talked about this build and fight formula, which was months ago, y'all go back and watch the videos, we made reference to something known as the People's Network for Land and Liberation. We haven't really gotten into it until now. So Blair, why don't we start with you and you let our audience know exactly what is the People's Network for Land and Liberation?
Thanks. The that kind of harks back a little bit to your, I got a resume that includes a lot of stuff on it. And the People's Network for Land and Liberation is about integrating a lot of different concepts that are normally siloed into organic whole so we can actually get the benefits and the synergy of everything going on. And so there's 6 different locations around the country that are all deeply committed to this kind of build and fight formulation, solidarity economy, asset-based community development, however you want to, whichever lens you want to look at it through. There is a program that everyone has agreed to, but you have 6 individual organizations who are each doing a locally tuned, locally relevant version of standing this up, which means it's very different. The ecologies are different, the social structures are different, the rural versus urban is different, etc. But everybody has the same strong core beliefs, and so we adopted a structure as a consortium because we're not, all trying to micromanage what everybody else does, but we're trying to come together and aggregate our resources and our knowledge in a way that we can all move farther together than we possibly could individually. And everyone's kind of coming at it from with the 2 areas of specialty, in addition to trying their best to become a generalist in all of the aspects of what's going on. In my area of kind of specialization is in community production, digital fabrication, kind of uh, some agile project management and that kind of thing. However, I'm deep in the mix of standing up community land trusts and worker co-ops and different types of governance structures and then the organizing part of it. It's a extremely rewarding and extremely challenging process because nobody's whiteboarding this stuff. Everybody's on the ground trying to figure out how to make this actually work day to day. And you can find a lot of examples of 2 or 3 or 4 of the components together, but the magic will really happen when all of them can be stood up in the same place at the same time. And so that's what everybody kind of in the consortium is committed to doing. And we're kind of sharing our knowledge to be able to make that happen. That would be my kind of quick overview.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Now, before we get into your presentation, I want to switch up for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Kali, we've had you. You are no stranger to Black Liberation Media, to Rootwork. If you could just briefly refresh our audience's memory, Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, does have a community production center and a fabrication lab. What is that, and why is that?
The why I'll speak to,
Mm-hmm.
and to put it in no uncertain terms.
Mm-hmm.
For us, this was a way that we saw that we could own and control the means of production on a local level. That is why we chose to kind of pick this particular method of doing production up,
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to get ahead of a profound curve that digital fabrication is in. And, we wrote an article some years back called uh, um, uh, trying to remember the exact title right now, but it was a digital fabrication divide, trying to get ahead of the digital fabrication divide.
Mm-hmm.
And that laid out very specifically, for us, the particular role that we have to ensure to make sure that Black working class people who constitute the overwhelming majority of the people in Jackson, Mississippi, would not be left out of this development, similar to how we were left out of the critical advances of the second industrial revolution around technological revolution around things going from analog to digital,
Mm-hmm.
which created the whole kind of internet revolution, if you would, and which created this big digital gap, which in a place like Mississippi still exists and is still profound about who has access, how well their access are, just to the basic internet and the functions of the internet, and how that has re-articulated our world and how it functions over the last 20 years. So we are trying to, we see and have experienced, how that rolled out and it left large part of our communities out. And now having that experience and understanding this technology rolling out, coming online, and particularly making some critical advances, really since the beginning of the 2000s, like 2003, I think, Blair, correct me if I'm wrong, is when the first fab lab, got up off the ground. So that's only about 22 years ago. And it's still young. It's still kind of developing and emerging. And there's a particular way that we feel that we can shape and we need to shape where this technology and where this method of production goes, so that it benefits our communities, and that's Black, brown, yellow working class communities in particular that we are concerned with, and to make sure we are not left behind and left prey to what is now rolling out with these kind of tech lords, and how they are reshaping the world before our very eyes.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Thank you for that recap, even though it was only half, but thank you for that. So Dave, I'm sorry, not David. I'm thinking about the other brother we're going to be having as a guest in a future Build and Fight. Blair, your presentation for today. I'm going to share the screen for our audience to see what it is you are presenting to us.
All right.
Hopefully, that's large enough for people to see.
Yeah. Keep in mind, we're not going to go kind of slide by slide. So I'll give you a cue to skip a couple as we're kind of rolling through. And let me just riff a little bit off of what Kali was saying about his initial concerns about automation.
Mm-hmm.
And digital fabrication is a means of automation. And automation has displaced a tremendous number of people from the roles that they had in society, the means of earning a living that they had, et cetera. And it especially hit hard in our communities. And one interesting thing about this is that equipment, which had the leverage and the power to not require a tremendous amount of labor to get the benefits, is now inexpensive enough that we can purchase it and make it ourselves and embed it in our communities, to not have it working against us, but to have it working for us. Mm-hmm. And so that's one way of thinking about what this kind of transition is about. And so there's a couple kind of leading slides here, and just kind of framing this in the context of solidarity economy. And kind of, why don't you roll to the next one slightly? You know, we're all familiar, and I have peeked in on a few of the earlier episodes, and this isn't an audience that needs to be convinced that we're in a time of polycrisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have to beat this one. However, I do want to you know, just note that we do have an opportunity to move into a context of local resilience and self-provisioning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a major part of what this is about. Being able to have control to provide the things that you need for yourself eliminates a tremendous amount of manipulation that occurs from the outside. And we know what it's driven by. And part of the ability to actually be able to produce for yourself is having the supply chain. You know, you can have a wonderful set of tools, but if you don't have the raw materials to be able to produce with, you're also sunk. And so one of the interesting pieces about this is having the ability to create the things that you need based on the things that you have. And so that local control of local supply chains is also a critical ingredient. So you could head over to the next one. And so, you know, in the context of solidarity economy, the point is to give people just kind of an idea of the fact that we're not just talking about producing widgets, but, you know, to have embedded institutions, you know, based around permanent structures like community land trusts, but to be able to fabricate things like housing. A significant part of community production isn't just the digital fabrication, which focuses on the built environment, but also using natural systems to produce the things that you can get from what would normally be considered an agricultural context. And that's things like nutrition, things like medicinal components. And it's telling me it seems like my camera is unplugged, and it is not.
Yeah, the screen, your name is up. We can hear you, but for some reason,
Your screen went out on us. Yeah.
Okay. I will keep moving, and maybe it will magically reappear, because I'm on a laptop with an integrated camera, and it definitely didn't go anyplace.
Right.
Okay. So there's the agricultural component, which includes being able to grow things for energy, grow things for fiber, building stock, food, medicinal components, etc. Right. And to operate those in the context of democratic decision making and distributed wealth creation in co-ops and the like. And it tends to, when it's in place, since people can come in and actualize their ideas, it tends to be a place where people come together to co-create, whether that's art, whether those are cultural artifacts, and to share experiences and teach each other also. So that's what the educational space component is about. And so moving on, there's a number of components of this whole solidarity economy piece that we can talk about. But what I want to focus the slight majority of the time on is what's unique about this and folks have less familiarity with, which is the digital fabrication.
Next slide. So, stay here.
You can move on to the next slide, which you don't have to focus on a lot. The next one. So let's talk about the problem statement and move to the one after that. And so this is a kind of traditional presentation. And so this is slightly small, but on the left-hand side, you can see the evidence of the crises that folks are dealing with and try to ignore, which are, very polluting and waste generating methods of doing things, which are, used to say it's eliminating the potential for, our children and our grandchildren. But the bottom line is diminishing. If you're 20 or 30 now, it's diminishing your capacity at, when you get into your adulthood. This is happening very rapidly. We also have, lack of social support systems, and we have this kind of disposable concept around things. And it's not just like stuff you buy at Target, but it's also like buildings that you build and then move out of and go to someplace shiny while it's still got 20 years lifetime in place. The framework I like to use in thinking about this is kind of donut economics, which is that framework on the right. And in case folks are not familiar with it, it's just a simple way of saying that we have to satisfy our needs and we have to live within our means, right? So we have a set of things that should be a social floor that everybody is entitled to. And so those are based kind of on the
light green.
So the dark green on the inner part of the circle and in the inner part of the light green there has the names of the primary areas that are important. And that's water, you gotta have air, you gotta have social structures, you have to have fairness, you have to have several other things. And the kind of red areas that go on the inside is the extent to which we're deficient in those areas, that we're not providing a minimum social floor to people in those dimensions. And then the outer green area has to do with planetary boundaries. And the red that's coming out of the outside are those planetary boundaries that we're actually overloading.
Let me see if I can do this real quick. So the light green within the things that we all need, such as energy, water, food, health, education, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equity, housing, etc.
Right.
And here in the red, we have biodiversity is less, land conversion, nitrogen and phosphorus flooding, climate change. That's in the red.
And those are all things that we are exceeding the planet's capacity to maintain a balance in. There are other planetary boundaries also that we need to respect. And so in this kind of graphic, the sweet spot is the light green in the middle. We would like to stay in there so we're not exceeding the planetary boundaries and we are providing the social floor that people deserve. And so the issue is it's really catastrophic if you're not providing for people's needs and using up way too many resources because you're exceeding the capacity of the planet to kind of keep up with it. It wouldn't be half as bad as we were, just exceeding some planetary boundaries, but everybody was having their needs met, or the opposite. But to have both of them out of whack is a pretty catastrophic situation. So kind of moving on. There's
real quick in the white on the outside of this circle, we have air pollution, ozone layer depletion, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, and freshwater withdrawals. All of
And
these impacting.
yeah, those are other planetary boundaries, which, as of the time of this analysis, were not being overshot. We're still using them, but we're not using them faster than they can regenerate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those areas on the outside, whether they're red or white, are the planetary boundaries. The ones that are in red are the ones that we are overshooting. Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the next one is just a specific example. You can break this down more and more, and you can have local effects of this, and you can have kind of global effects of this. And we don't have to dive into that. But my point is that it's actually a good analysis framework to kind of keep track of what you're doing. And that's one of the tools that we use here in order to see, whether we are living within our means, right? We have a responsibility to not only provide for ourselves, but to allow other people to provide for themselves simultaneously, and to allow future generations to have the resources to do the same themselves. And so this is a tool to be able to just check yourself on that process, right?
Okay.
And oftentimes, you can move on to the next one a little bit. There are people who are still stuck in this concept of the American dream and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and a whole lot of other pieces. And so this is just a reality check for a lot of folks, in that the United States is right in the middle of a pack with a bunch of other places. And so this is a study that was done that kind of indicates in the United States, on average, it takes 5 generations for someone who's in poverty to move out of poverty. That doesn't mean to move to a point where you're thriving. That means to move out of poverty. 5 generations is a very long time. So, the point of trying to do your lone wolf strategy of being, one of the entrepreneurs or pulling yourself up by the bootstraps is really a fallacy. And so studies actually kind of prove that also. It's working together in order to change the conditions that's going to make an impact for us. And so let me just kind of run through digital fabrication a little bit. You can kind of go down.
Practical tool.
Yeah. And so this is what Kali was starting to kind of refer to. And so we've been in an era where we have developed technologies that have really been almost earth-shattering. And I almost paused before I said that, but the fact of the matter is that's true, because we are in fact shattering the earth through the misuse of a lot of these technologies, but it's been very transformational. The first one that happened was communications. I'm old enough to remember when you made a phone call, the farther away the person you were calling, the more static you got on the line, because it was an analog line and it was subject to interference from the outside. Digital has an ability to be able to kind of correct itself. And so when digital communications came along, you could accurately communicate stuff around the world, up to satellites, down through submarines, down through cables and everything else. It created a huge difference in the ability to accurately convey information. And that was hugely transformational, because a lot of the supply chain globalization and that kind of thing requires coordination through communications. And that communications wouldn't have been feasible at this level if we're still doing it in the analog way. So that changed the world quite a bit. The next thing that happened was computation going from analog to digital. There was a point in time where computation had gears that were meshing, and it was a mechanical process to compute something. Either that, or you had a group of experts, like in the movies, who were doing the computations. But it was an analog process. When we shifted to digital computation, things were able to be done in a repeatable manner, in an error correcting manner, and it opened the door for miniaturizing things and embedding computation in things like communications devices. And everybody's got something in their pocket or sitting beside them on the table, which is an amazing result of this conversion of communications from analog to digital and computation from analog to digital. And that absolutely changed the way we live life, the way we manufacture things, for the better and for the worse. And so we've had an opportunity to watch these actually fairly carefully and understand what the structure of these looks like. And so a key thing right now is that with the benefit of having seen those two processes going from analog to digital, we can recognize the fact that we're in the middle of a third one, which is manufacturing, materials, fabrication going from analog to digital. We're still in the process of that transformation, but we have the early parts of the emergence of digital impact on that that's happening right now. And so there was a point in time where, we took a big piece of stuff and we whittled away pieces that we didn't want, or we took some clay and we put it together and shaped it into something different. It was a very analog kind of process. We're moving into digital now by having computers control the manipulation of the materials. But the end game on this is to actually have materials that have the digital codes embedded in this. And instead of having, big machine fabricating of small things, you have large things that grow out of material that has digital fabrication capabilities as an intrinsic part of the material. So you can shift to the next one, which is just kind of a quick kind of historical graph. And these are coming from the Center of Bits and Atoms at MIT, and the Fab Foundation and the Fab Academy. The first one that has the kind of blue, which is back in the mid 60s, early 70s, were the first, when they first started developing integrated circuits. They had transistors and then started putting multiple transistors on the chip. And the more transistors you put on the chip, the more capable it was. And so industry kind of started driving this process. And one of the early pioneers of this process, who was tracking it, noticed that there was kind of an exponential growth in the capabilities. And if you plot it on a log scale, it comes out as a line. And so every year or two, the capabilities would double on these integrated circuits. And this was only after maybe 4 or 5 years. And he posited that wouldn't it be amazing if this continued for maybe 10 years? The world would be such a radically different place, because this increased capabilities would allow you to have things that you could communicate with, that you could carry in a backpack, et cetera, et cetera. The next one kind of shows that it didn't go 5 years, it went for 50 years. And so that continued exponential growth, which is kind of shown where the green is helped drive communications and computation, because it was that creating integrated circuits that can handle the communications and computation tasks. But that growth pattern of exponential growth has completely transformed the world, and it's created situations where people got caught off guard because it was expanding so quickly that we didn't have the policies in place to deal with the capabilities that kind of emerged. So the bottom one is an observation of what's happening now with digital fabrication. And the number, quantity, capabilities of the machines and the labs, that the lab equivalent that incorporates these machines, has been doubling every 18 months or 2 years for pretty consistently for a period of time. I think when we, at Insight Focus kind of joined the Fab Lab network, I think we were lab 30 something. Now there are over 3,000 of them. And that was only a decade ago. And the number is still doubling about every 18 months or so. So that's kind of an indication that we are in this process of exponential growth in this digital fabrication. And that's important to note. When we joined, it seemed like we were late to the game, but you look back 10 years later and now we're considered pioneers, because it's expanding so fast that if you get in the mix, understand what you're doing and start contributing, it is absolutely not too late to shape the direction and the course that this is taking. And that's one of the messages of this, is that the folks who know what this should be used for need to get involved in steering the trajectory of what it will be used for. Because if not, all these technologies always get hijacked to maintain the status quo, to have mechanisms of securing the high ground that people already have. And we'll be looking around wondering why we're on the sidelines after this earth-changing development occurred for yet another time. And the only way that'll change is if we get in the mix of this and start doing what we always do, which is to take something and turn it into something that nobody ever thought of before. There's no lack of creativity and innovation in the communities we're dealing with. What we have to do is to reach out and take these tools, which have super high leverage, and start using our finesse in innovation in this space also. So you can go on and kind of take a look at the next slide. And so there's a look in this where when we started out, the fabrication, a computer or a fabrication device was on the order of $1 million. And we had, basically one of them over here and another one over there. When it came down to about $100,000, we had kind of a community level capabilities, not something that was restricted to a large government agency. And so when you had those that were able to be embedded in the community, and that's an example on the left of the computer version of this, and on the right of the Fab Lab version, like that mini computer, there were PDPs and from DEC in the Massachusetts area, and I'm from the Detroit area, so Burroughs was the one. But it was a computer that took up a whole room, or at least a good part of the room, but it didn't take up a whole building. So there are a lot of companies that got this. And so there are people who had a chance to actually work with these directly, as opposed to sliding a request into a door that somebody would run the big computer and give you results back. And when people started using the computer directly, they started creating things with it that folks had not anticipated. And this time period where you had these massive computers, they're mini computers, but they're big compared to our standards. I mean, these things are much less capable than the watches that we're wearing these days. But this is a time period when people developed word processors and spreadsheets and digital music and all sorts of different kind of capabilities. The fabrication equivalent of that is kind of almost where we are right now. The picture on the right is a typical fab lab. A few thousand square feet, a couple tons of equipment. But it's the kind of thing that you're not going to have in your backyard or your basement, but you can have in the community. And it's on the order of $100,000 or $200,000. And people can get their hands on things and start creating and innovating things that they want to create. And so it's no longer the case that you have to wait for somebody else to invent what you want. You can come up with an idea, you can go in the fab lab, you can prototype it, you can debug it, and you can make what it is that you want. So being able to innovate and create the things that you need in your community is a significant game changer. And being able to overlay your own ethical framework by owning materials is also critically important. So then it kind of continues accelerating. Computers, when they got down to $10,000, there were millions of them around. We're just entering the point where we're getting some digital fabrication down, and it's continuing to exponentially grow as the cost of the capabilities kind of comes down. And then computation has also gone down to, $1,000. You got iPads and phones, and then you have billions of these. And then we have embedded electronics in a lot of things, and you have trillions of these. There's a model on the right of where digital fabrication will be going, but we're not there yet. We're kind of at the threshold between the $100,000 and the $10,000 level in digital fabrication, but we know the direction. And one of the interesting things with the fab labs is that they have gained the level of capability to be able to build the stuff in themselves. So I can have a fab lab and build another fab lab in my fab lab. And in the process of doing that, I can innovate around the equipment and create less expensive versions, more customized versions. So now the fab labs are starting to drive the process of what the next generation of digital fabrication would be, not the original manufacturers of the fabrication of equipment. So that's an idea of an area of communities being empowered to drive this forward. You can head on to the next slide. So here's let's integrate the people into this, and this is part of the challenge. That blue curve, if you do it on a normal plot, is an exponential curve. And so that's what that straight line on a log curve looks like if you just look at it as normal people do, which is just, over time, what's the number? It looks like a hockey stick, and they call those hockey stick curves sometimes. So it's kind of flat, and then you see it moving, and then suddenly, what the heck just happened? Because it just, tripled, when in the last 10 years, it didn't look like it was doing anything. Although it was tripling, it was just at a smaller level. Our problem is we don't do that as people and as organizations. At best, we go along in a straight line. And so there's a significant mismatch when the technology outpaces our ability to organize to do constructive things with it. And that's what that gap is kind of talking about. So one of the things that we're doing, being familiar with this growth path of digital fabrication, again, since we've seen it a couple of times with communications and computation, we kind of know where this is going, and kind of being exposed to and familiar and participating in the development framework for this. You know, we know where the experiments are that people are doing that are 10 years out. So we can see that this is actually growing in that direction. So instead of plodding along and just, you know, pretending like 5 years from now is going to be like 5 years ago or even now, you know, I think we all can feel at this point in time that the world's changing more every 5 years now than it was every 50 years a couple generations ago. So we have to look to where things are going to be and organize ourselves towards being ready for it when it gets there. There's an old, you know, saying in hockey, I think Gordie Howe or somebody said it, which is that you skate to where the puck's going, not where it is, right? And so what we're doing is changing the angle on that orange line so that when the capabilities of the technology gets to the point that it really is even more transformative, we will be where we need to be in order to do that. And so that's one of the things about community production at this point in time. We can innovate and create things that are very unique and special to us that no one else will want to do because it's not a mass market item. However, it's still cheaper to mass produce things that are very generic. However, it pays for us to start making our own stuff, even if you could get it less expensively at Walmart, because we need to develop our capacity to be able to control this technology. So even though at this instant in time, it may be slightly less cost effective to do it ourselves, it puts us in a position to be masters of the technology when the technology gets to a point where it'll actually be much cheaper for us to do it ourselves. That point in time is not the point in time to start trying to learn it. That's when you get left in the dust and everybody's looking around saying, why is everybody doing this except for us? So that's just a kind of a quick graphic to kind of indicate that now's the time for us to jump on it, even if it's a bit cumbersome, because it'll take us much longer to understand the technology than the technology is advancing. So you can go on to the next slide.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Just want to remind folks, this is session 5 of the Build and Fight formula presented by Cooperation Jackson here on Rootwork and Black Liberation Media. That's for our listening audience and for those who have joined us late on YouTube. Our special guest today is Blair Evans, currently a resident of Idlewild, Michigan, a leader in the People's Network for Land and Liberation, and a principal representative of the Idlewild node of the consortium, and serves on several local and county boards in planning and development. Blair is a member of the board of the Fab Foundation and is founder and director of Insight Focus, a production and training lab focused on relationships between digital fabrication, permaculture, experiential learning, and appropriate technology. And unfortunately, Blair's technology went out for a moment. We could see his smiling face earlier, but now his camera's acting up. But that's okay. The information is a lot more important. So we are going to continue on with this information.
Okay, you can run through another slide or two. So you can scroll past this happy picture. And this is some examples of our lab in Detroit with people kind of creating and building things in some of the markets that we kind of served to be self-sustaining. But get to the next one. And so this is just as people are trying to imagine, what does this mean? We are building a space here for center community production in Idlewild, and this is about the model that we're dealing with. So we're talking about a fairly small space. So, you know, maybe 2,500 square feet for a fab lab with a lot of room for a lot of people to be able to operate effectively. Fab lab has a lot of high-tech equipment that allows you to make things, but oftentimes there are people who want to use some of that equipment but have other things that they use also. So we have co-making space that allow them to locate in the same area so that they have easy access to the digital fabrication equipment. But if they have some custom things that they do with leather making or with auto things or with a specific kind of welding or whatever, they can also have their equipment at the same place. And then co-working space for folks who are more on the design and people part of the business as opposed to just the fabrication part. And then the design and the design center and the showroom allows for building highly personalized, customized versions of things for people. So I need something to fit in this space that operates in this way. I may not be competent to build it at this point in time, but I want to engage the people here who are part of my community who do have that ability, and I want to buy it from you so you can do the custom design there. It goes back to the fab lab and gets produced, and then they pick it up a few days later. So that just to give people an idea of what we're talking about. This is a graciously proportioned one. You could do it in a quarter of the space, but you'd be a little tight. So this is not something that requires a huge amount of resources. So let's scroll through really quickly, just a kind of visual tour. And these are old projects that we're kind of looking at right now. So go down another one. This was a house that was built out of a fab lab in Barcelona that was designed and won a solar decathlon over there. Designed from the perspective that form follows energy as opposed to form follows function. But that's a scale of things that can be built out of a fab lab. And so you can kind of continue. This is electronic circuit boards. We make our own circuit boards in the fab lab. So if you have an idea for something that requires automation or sensing or control, that's something that we can do in the lab. Don't need to send it to China, et cetera, along the way. You can keep scrolling. You can produce things that are, of everyday use, like soles of shoes and that kind of thing. An important part of this is not only can we customize it, because you could 3D scan your foot and make something that fits perfectly, but we can also choose materials that aren't polluting the planet or extracting resources from people who are being abused in the process. So being able to manage a supply chain for yourself using bioplastics and that kind of thing can be pretty transformative. Folks have also made little CubeSats, not to support the folks who are throwing thousands of satellite junks out there, but the fact is that you have the capability of producing things at that level of complexity. You can keep scanning, scrolling down. These are a set of things from a retro kind of calculator to a kayak you can see on the left-hand side to artistically organized guitar to a musical instrument, bicycle. At the top in the middle is a wide area communications network that was deployed in Afghanistan. So if you need some ability to have redundant communications, you can kind of produce your own wide area communications network, et cetera. There's some prosthetics up to the right and a drone in the middle. You can keep scrolling. This is some of the programs and the like that we offered and some of the equipment, laser cutters, 3D printers. You can kind of keep scrolling. In our building, the architectural partitions to the upper left are ones that we designed and built in the lab. Signage down there, that small thing, kind of bottom middle is actually a self-sufficient micro cabin that we produced in the lab that actually met building standards. And then all of the furniture and the tables and the like made in the lab. And there's actually software available so people can design that without having to become masters of computer-aided design. So you can keep scrolling. These are people doing some work in the lab on some of the equipment. You can keep moving. This is just transformation from kind of experimenting to final results. And so, yeah, you can skip that. So community production ingredients, digital fabrication is a key piece. And I just spent some time going over that because that's the one that people are usually least familiar with. Another key thing is having a holistic perspective or ecosystem perspective. Indigenous worldview is an accurate way of describing it. No matter which indigenous culture you're dealing with, everyone had an understanding that they were part of the environment that they were in, and they were responsible for making sure that generations in the future had the same capabilities that they did. So there's no strip mining or that kind of thing. It was about being in right relationship with the environment that you were in. And so that can manifest as agroecology or permaculture or regenerative agriculture, afroecology. All of those have slightly different perspectives on the same thing, some narrower, some wider, but all of those are that concept. Also, a part of community production is the organizational and social systems. And, to be accurate, we kind of think of this as a three-legged stool. The digital fabrication is about the built environment. The ecosystem perspective also incorporates the natural environment and also keeps people on track in the digital environment because you're looking at where you're getting materials from and what waste streams, quote unquote, you're producing along the way. Then the third leg of the stool is those human systems and organizational systems that will allow small groups of people who have skills in digital fabrication and ecosystems to be able to self-organize and execute as a high-performance team and get things done. And that's agile project management, lean launch concepts that operates in a context of co-ops, and also the broad umbrella of trusts, whether the community land trust or perpetual purpose trust or those kind of things. So those organizational social systems are critically important because people will grab digital fabrication and permaculture and do the craziest things imaginable if they are managed by top-down folks who are just trying to maintain their power dynamic that they have already have. So if we don't have the ability to organize ourselves to own this stuff and to do what we want to do with it and not work for somebody else telling us what to do, then we're just going to be stooges in the next generation of oppression. So that organizational and social systems are obviously a key part of it. And then there's a huge aspect in the human dynamic of moving from a job system to a work system, moving from the context where you're doing a narrow range of things to earn some money, often things that you don't really care about, to get a wage to then pay other people to do the things that you really don't know how to do for yourself, but that you need done. And your ability to genuinely participate in all of the things that happen to provide for yourself is extremely limited because you're spending all your time earning money and spending money. The new work kind of paradigm is around people having the ability to be user innovators themselves, working in community with other people to create the things that are needed, which means you need to analyze what's needed in the community and participate in a genuine way in the built environment and the social structures in the community in order to be able to create those things. That leads to the ability for people to become more fully developed and evolved. I mean, we are really handicapped by the lack of participation that we are kind of forced into just keeping up with our survival mode existence. When we have an ability to actually be actual players in the process, then our gifts bloom and we're able to bring them in a real way. And we become more fully grown and fully alive human beings. And so even though digital fabrication is about fabricating stuff, from my perspective, a Center for Community Production is equally about facilitating the development of people, because people who have the access to tools have an ability to manifest and grow and evolve their gifts and bring those gifts to themselves, their family, and their community, and then everybody prospers from that dynamic. So you can continue to move on. I'm happy to pause if anybody wants to unpack anything. So another aspect of that is that, we basically are atrophying, kind of wasting away by not having the ability to bring our full selves to the things that we're dealing with on a daily basis, because our jobs are usually have very narrow demands on what we're doing. And most of us do not have the time to engage in avocations and other major activities outside the work and the grind. So that slide is basically just about building our community capacity, and that's by us becoming our best selves along the way. And so an initial focus of that is us, developing self-sufficiency and that supporting some self-determination. And that doesn't have to go from 0 to 100%. If we move to 30 or 40% there, we would grow significantly. And through that growth, be in a position to take it to 50 or 60% and to keep feeding on itself. You can go to the next slide. So we did some analyses with people, and Fritjof Bergman, who we work with for a while, did the same thing, just surveys. What do you spend most of your money on? And by inference, what do you spend most of your time earning money to spend on? And so it's food, shelter, various utilities, transportation, clothing, personal accessories, furniture, health, hopefully creating wellness, but also dealing with illness, education, and childcare. So that's a priority list for the things that we want to focus on, the Center for Community Production being able to directly address, right? And it's interesting when we work with people and we convert these from talking about how much money do you spend on food to how many hours a week do you spend earning the money that you spend on food. It's like time is something that's like concrete and we can identify with. Dollars are kind of an abstraction. So it's interesting the visceral reaction that people have when you map this out in terms of dollars. You mean I'm spending that percentage of my life just keeping up with this? So this helps frame for people what we want to focus on and how we want to prioritize. You can move on to the next one, which is just basically saying there's been anthropological research and the like that supported those same sets of things. And they're the same things that we need to become less dependent on these larger systems that we can see are disintegrating around us, that are not only fragile, they are dysfunctional, and they're being weaponized in ways to not provide us with access to the things that we need, which makes us very subject to manipulation. So through a couple of different ways, we come up with a priority list, and the Centers for Community Production are tuned towards addressing those core needs. You can move on to the next one. And what we do with this is, kind of a basic fab lab is starting with kind of goods and access to the equipment. So it's a shared community space where people can come in, have access to the tools. The next level up is providing the literacy to be able to use those tools, and those are services. And also services for people who don't necessarily want to know how to use the tools, but want to help pay their neighbors to be able to create the things that they need. Then you keep moving up. People have experiences in this process, whether it's what is this DIY stuff all about, et cetera, and transformations can emerge from people gaining a sense of agency. So we're building up kind of that food chain from the bottom, while at the same time, we're building down from the top with the expectation is we're going to meet in the middle. So we're doing community development work, which has nothing to do with digital fabrication or goods and services or permaculture. We're doing community infrastructure, and we do a lot with municipal activities here. And then we're doing the refinement and development of institutions and changing the economic framework within the communities. And as we keep pushing down from the top and up from the bottom, we're going to link these in the middle as we go along. One of the reasons this is important is that if you're trying to do real quality work at the lower levels, you can spend an inordinate amount of time trying to avoid the institutional structures that make it impractical because they weren't designed for that. So we found it's much more effective to begin to collaborate with municipal elements, township, county, state, et cetera, to create the circumstances by which it's actually feasible with low resistance to do the type of solidarity economy work that we would like to do. And we're having very good success with that simultaneous process. You can move on to the next one. You can skip that one. We already went over me. That's one of our labs that was in Detroit. You can keep kind of rolling past. This is some software that's available on our website that would allow you to design a table for yourself. You just say how high you want it, how many shelves you want, how much overhang, how wide and how deep. And it'll produce the files that the machines would need in order to actually produce the table. So we give people an easy on-ramp to fabricating things without having to learn a whole lot of things. And then after somebody does something like that, it's like, well, how can I write that? Or how can I use an additional tool to have more flexibility? And then when they're in the flow, they have an interest and they know that they want to learn computer-aided design and some other pieces along the way. You can keep scrolling. Okay, kind of a catchphrase, and this came from Neil Gershenfeld also, which is how will we live, learn, work, and play when anyone can make anything anywhere. And it's useful to kind of reflect on that because that's where we're getting to. And if we're not prepared to not just follow the plans that other people have laid out as to how we ought to organize ourselves physically, spatially, emotionally, socially, if we're not prepared to drive that agenda ourselves, then we're going to have it driven for us. And we're at the point where it's actually more feasible than ever to actually make that happen. So you can go to the next slide. Keep going. Yep, you can go a few more. This is kind of our just poster in the lab to remind people, fight for what you want now or fight against what you don't want later. So if we don't get on this and do what we want, we're going to be fighting against the other people doing to us with us what we could have been doing for us ourselves. You can keep going. So that's the key kind of component of this. There's several other areas I could unpack about how this fits into a whole emerging structure of how change and disruption kind of actually happens. But what I'll say without going through all of this, because I'd like to leave some time for dialogue and discussion, is that having the means to actually create things based on supply chains that you have some control over allows you to do deep innovation on things and not be manipulated by folks who want to stop you from doing it. It's also the case that a lot of people who do technological innovation, that innovation gets hijacked to perpetuate the existing system as opposed to it being a stretch and a prototype of a new system. And so you can also stop from being hijacked by having the means to control what you want. So I guess I ought to speak briefly about, Kali mentioned owning the method of production, which is another way of, phrasing, Marx's analysis of the means of production, which is, fundamentally the tools and the machines, factories, land, raw materials, the things that it takes, those physical and non-human inputs into production. It's important to own the means of production, but what's really important is to surround that with the different relational structures that allows you to change the mode of production, which is a broader concept. It includes the means of production, but it also includes the social relationships of production, right? The relationships between the people involved in production, especially in terms of ownership and control. You're not really able to do that if you don't own the means, but just owning the means of production and still following the dominant narrative about resource extraction and getting rich, minimizing wages and all that kind of stuff just allows more people to perpetuate destructive habits. So we look at owning the means of production as the gateway to changing the modes of production. And so, some examples of modes of production in the past are, those economic structures that we talk about, from feudalism to capitalism, socialism, et cetera. Those are all different arrangements in the context of the mode of production. And so those social and economic relationships are the point, and owning the means of production through digital fabrication, through the natural systems work, through the agile project management and is the end game of this. So we're not just tech geeks for the sake of it. This is a means to an end. And the end is us being able to get right in our relationships with the planet, relationships with each other. And that's the point in the end game. So you want to open it up to any discussions? I'm happy to talk about this dynamics of change, but that'll get us into another hour of interesting conversation.
Well, I wanted to come back on that, I think, toward the second half. Anyway, Blair, probably in for one of the later parts of this series, these dynamics of change, I want to include, I think, in episode 9, which will be around October. So we're going to be coming back to you and a couple of other folks on that. So I just want to, to kind of whet folks' appetite to know if you're looking at that, and hopefully we're paying attention. For those of you, again, who are first getting exposed to this, on Hard Knock Radio or some other venues where it's only audio, definitely check out the video at Black Liberation Media and at Jackson Rising YouTube pages, so you can actually see the visuals that accompany the presentation. But a couple of things that I know constantly come up, and I know it was raised, Blair. If you could speak a little bit more to the piece around the supply chains, right, and the raw materials that are being used and employed, and how I want folks in this audience in particular to understand more like where we are now is not ultimately where we want to go, but what is the transformative process in terms of the supply chains and the value chains? How do you see this learning curve and us being involved, being able to shift the materials that we use, so we're not involved in the deep kind of processes of extraction that most industrial production right now is currently dependent upon?
Yep. So I talked about the phase of digital fabrication that we're in right now, and it's kind of currently conceptualized as a 4-stage process. So we're in the buy commercial equipment that has a range of capabilities necessary to produce the range of things that we need, with a key point in that is it has a capability of producing things like the equipment itself. So, you kind of know you have a broad set of capabilities if you can build machines in addition to just building stuff. You can build stuff that builds stuff, right? And so one of the advantages of that in the short run is that we can build machines that use materials that it's not commercially advantageous for mass manufacturers to make. For example, here in Michigan, we got a license to grow industrial hemp. We can take industrial hemp and you can separate the fiber from the resins and the like, and you can make bioplastics, from some of the resins. You can make some adhesives and the like with that. And there are several ways, for example, that you can create bioplastics. And 3D printers, as they stand right now, are not generally designed to be able to effectively use those materials. They're set up to use very highly refined, very uniform, petrochemical-based filaments, or some of them are plant-based, like PLA. However, if you look at the manufacturing process for that, then we all know how much yield out of unintended consequences come from polluting water and all that kind of stuff from that. If we can design and tweak a 3D printer that can use materials that we can grow locally, then we can minimize our environmental footprint. Again, that's our own ethical framework, but we also have possession of the materials that we need, and we don't have to depend on tariffs going up and down, et cetera, with China and some other things, right? And so the ability to create equipment isn't just about replicating the exact equipment in the lab. It's also about replicating the capabilities of the equipment and then looking around to see what materials we have and tuning the machine so that they can use what we have access to, right? And so I think one of the aspects of localizing the supply chain is being able to build machines that can internally monitor themselves and adapt to a wider range of materials so that we can use materials that we're recycling that don't have to be 100% uniform and pure, right? It can measure the fact that there's a deviation in the material that's coming in, so we can internally tune the process in order to get the results that we want on the way out, and materials that, using our natural systems, understanding wood, fiber, various biomaterials, and there's a huge emerging range of folks who are dealing with how to create different types of environmentally sound materials. We have an ability to, at this point in time, tune our inputs to be able to have a much lighter footprint and to have more self-sufficiency in terms of just depending upon the stuff we have access to fabricate. The real magic starts happening though. So stage one is basically we're buying commercial equipment. We're migrating into phase two, where we're using our equipment to build our own equipment. So fab labs are fabricating fab labs. That's a fab lab 2.0. Phase three is shifting this arrangement quite a bit. All of the characteristics that you can get out of all of the different types of mechanical materials, electrical characteristics of materials, can be gained from a couple dozen varieties of substances if you can integrate them kind of as a molecular level, right? If I look at the supply chain that we use for electronics and stuff in the Fab Lab now, we order things from places that have millions of SKUs, millions of different types of products that are sitting on the shelves. And they get impacted by tariffs and supply chains, but there's also the significant environmental footprint of that. But everything in that huge multi-million square foot warehouse could be locally fabricated by a couple dozen containers of different materials if we have the equipment that can combine those materials at a refined enough and a small enough level. So the third generation of digital fabrication is getting away from these bulk materials, getting away from these prepackaged integrated circuits, prepackaged metal rods or whatever, and combining the materials on the fly as they're fabricating things to integrate in motor functions, actuator functions, structural functions, computational functions in the fabric of the material, right? I mean, if you look at your hand, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in your hand. And so it's all blended. You know, your hand has nerves that actually does some reactions in your hand. It's got musculature, it's got structural elements and all that kind of thing. And so that's the kind of deal. You know, you have a core set of components, just like your body intermixes things in order to generate a wide variety. The third generation of digital fabrication will allow us to have machines, still big machines making small stuff, but really restrict the range of inputs that are necessary. And the idea there is that we can set up some regional producers of those core feedstocks. And since we don't need thousands of variations on the theme, it'll be a lot easier to keep up with that process. The serious end game is basically replicating biology. In trees, squirrels, tomato plants, us, we're all digitally fabricated. You know, I often tell the joke, and it's not a joke, that, you know, if you take two 20-year-olds who are biologically compatible and mutually interested and send them out into the woods and they have some survival skills, come back in a couple of years, there'll be a third person there, right? There'll be a baby. And that baby was digitally fabricated based on the DNA from the two parents and local materials. Nothing imported from China or India or any place else. It was the sun that shone on that place, the rain that fell, and the materials in the soil and the like. A human structure is one of the most complicated things that we're familiar with. And so we have a proof of concept that digital fabrication can actually create extremely complex things. And the way it works in that context is that our DNA encodes what we're supposed to be. And we have molecular scale machinery that reads that DNA and then produces structures out of the materials that we eat, or when we're in the womb from the materials that our mother ate, and forms all of the structures that consist of, you know, that comprise us. And then from that point on, it continually fabricates what we need from what we eat, and the energy we bring in, but also the physical material we bring in. And that's a lot of small molecular scale machinery that's building big, complicated stuff and diverse, complicated stuff. There's another really unique aspect of that also, and is that by having the digital code embedded in the material can self-repair because it knows what it should be, and it has a code of what it should be. So if you injure yourself, you don't have a machine that comes in and fixes you. Your body fixes itself because it knows what structures are supposed to be there, and it has the code internally for how to build those structures, right? So you have an ability to grow and self-repair things. If I wanted to make something with current technology, you know, I could go outside and get a wheelbarrow full of soil, and that has a bunch of stuff in it. It has aluminum and copper and iron and a bunch of other stuff in it, not in high quantities. So in order to get it, our current process is we import some oil from the Middle East, we heat it up to some ridiculous temperature, polluting the air with all the byproducts and the like. We get a little nugget or something, then we send it through a whole bunch of other processes in order to come up with what we want. What a tomato plant will do is to go down and biochemically grab those molecules out of the soil based on nothing but the sunlight that's shining on it. And there's a much more efficient process with much lower side effects, right? And there is no waste from that process, because when the tomato plant degrades, other things in its ecology consume it, and it's all we want to call it in human terms a circular ecology, but I mean it's all a real ecology. And so that is the end game. And one of the reasons that fab labs are structured as they are is that all of the core sets of skills that you would need to be able to integrate in to do something like that is actually represented in the fab lab. We do networking and computational things in addition to structural pieces, et cetera. And so being able to build machines is one part. Being able to build the next generation of machines that use a whole different material set in that third generation. And that's when we're dealing with, maybe a couple dozen, a few dozen different types of materials that we can really at a very small scale intermix in different ways. Back in the 60s and 70s, I think they call that nanotechnology.
Right.
And so that allows us to make things that would actually fly out of the printer or walk out of the printer or roll out of the printer. It's a fully formed thing. So you're not building pieces and put it together. So a major part of the control and supply chains, we can do some of it at each step, but every time we take another step down that road of the digital fabrication roadmap, our ability to be in complete control over the supply chain increases, because we can make more flexible use of all the material that's around us on a regular basis. Did that kind of answer your question?
That did. I think, and then some. A couple of things come off of that, I think, and then there's a couple of things within some of the questions that I see, and I think Tanya has that we want to get into, Blair. But one thing I think, just give
mention
people
one thing too, and that might have seemed like 100-year long process going from generation 1 to generation 4.
You're going right to where I was going. Go ahead.
If I take care of myself, I'll be around when that happens. This isn't like 3 generations from now. This exponential growth is something that catches people off guard. And so you talk about something that's actually transformative. Kids that are in their, teens at this point in time are going to be living in a world where this is possible. If we get about our business and start learning this and start directing the technology, they'll be living in a world where we are able to use it for our benefit. If we don't, the powers that be are going to use this to further capture and monopolize power. And we're going to be even more marginalized than before. This is a really pivotal time period. And it's all about, are we going to figure out how to play this horn and take over this music as we continually do, or are we going to sit on the sidelines? So I just wanted to mention that timeline, because that's important.
Yeah, I was just where I was about to go, Blair, and just to give folks a sense, because I think there's a driving kind of notion that we are so far behind the cue ball that is somewhat hopeless, particularly with the rise of what people are calling artificial intelligence, right? This mass gathering of data and a utilization of it. One of the things that, if you could just take a minute to just talk about how these two things relate and how they differ, because I think that's a critical piece that I've seen in some of the discussions I've had trying to convince people that this is the path that we should follow. And what constantly comes up is like, well, isn't AI going to replace us in this particular process? And my answer always, it could. But again, that's left up to us. But I think there's some more technical dimensions of that we need to intervene on and folks need to be aware of. So if you could speak to that for just a brief second, Blair, I think that'll be helpful and lead us into some of the next questions.
Yeah. AI is an extraordinary, AI means a lot of things to a lot of different people. The version of AI that we're dealing with right now in these large language models and the evolution of that and the artificial general intelligence that people are talking about is actually a fairly limited version of non-human intelligence. And so it's a commercially valuable one for folks who are trying to concentrate power. and maximize extraction of wealth. So I would say a couple things about that. I don't see it as the end of the world. As a matter of fact, it gives an easier on-ramp for folks who are trying to learn digital fabrication. 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, you had to learn a whole lot of computer-aided design to get something to the point where you could 3D print it. Now you can say, I want a vase 4 inches high that's red, that's rippled and whatever, and you can have it generated in the AI and then use your capabilities to print it. And then you can take that and start modifying it and doing other things with it. It gives you some immediate gratification and it gives you a running start. And then you can back up and say, okay, let me learn how to modify this and do some other things with it. So it actually lowers the barrier of entry for folks who are trying to get into it, because you can use some AI tools to get into the mix, right? When you start getting into the physicality of things, the understanding the nature of what we want to make and how we interact with what we want to make and how the built environment shapes us as we shape the built environment is something that AI will have an ability to contribute to, but it is a very human kind of capacity. When you start dealing with the ethical framework of how to actually be in right relationship, AI pulls on a lot of stuff that people have written about the topic, and that's where the knowledge comes from. But there's a whole lot of people who've written ridiculous stuff on the topic also, and it pulls from that too. And so being able to have the nuance and the sophistication to be able to actually sort through this and not just follow some blind regurgitation and prediction based on the language models right now. I'm not trying to diminish AI. It's going to be huge, and it's going to displace a lot of people who have been doing fairly routine work, which is a ton of folks, because that's how the labor force has been structured, right? Folks to serve a very specific, narrow role. But what that allows us to do is be more general and more integrative in how we're approaching the problems that we're dealing with, which will provide for an opportunity for us to not be narrowed into doing knee-jerk reaction solutions and taking just a low-hanging fruit, for us to be able to step back and say, what would this look like if we really wanted to do it right? And to be able to use some of these tools to be able to do some of the grunt work, but we're still in creative control of what it is that we're trying to do. AI is going to be is currently and will continue to be massively impactful in all levels of jobs. And so part of this is, so the people who used to be doing routine work, what are we going to do now? Do we want to do some creative work? In which case we can use the AI tools and some other tools to create the things that we need. And we don't have to depend upon, the overlords to give us an opportunity to serve their needs. We can create the environment and the social structures and the relations when that whole, mode of production that we're doing what we want to do. And if the rest of the world is doing something else, they can drive themselves into oblivion as long as they're not taking us with us. And if we propagate this process and share what we learn, enough people have an ability to begin to, replicate this outwards and scale it outwards. We have an opportunity to begin to have a dominant impact on the dynamics on the planet. But we're going to have to take control back. And it's not figuring out a way to coexist. It's about coming up with an alternative pathway and working that pathway from my perspective.
Can you speak to, Todd, if you can put up Jay Johnson's question and just, one more time up on the screen so we can kind of get into that. Because what I would want you to do, but I don't know if you saw it, but there it is. If you could speak to how we are trying to collectively deal with aspects of this question within the People's Network for Land and Liberation, because I think we are trying to provide a model. I'm not saying we do completely as of yet, and there are some issues around the financing of this. But if you could speak to why are we calling this community production and not just something else much more random, which I think gets to this particular question.
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects of this. One is that, we have a strong belief that we need to empower our people in our community to bring themselves and their best gifts forward using this technology and other technologies for the benefit of the folks in the community. So it's community production because we're counting on people in the community to be the producers, the creators. I would say, we can't control what everybody does with this. And, that gets back to the fighting, fight for or fight against, right? There's a whole lot of ways of describing that and a whole lot of terminology, but fighting against everybody deploying these technologies in different ways, if we had the leverage to do it, it'd be nice to stop people from being as destructive as they are, but I don't see the leverage to be able to do that. What I do see is us being able to create and fight for a path that if more people utilize that path, it'll stop feeding the monster that's killing us, right? If we don't keep feeding into the economic structures of this, if we start decoupling ourselves, then we stop empowering the folks who are using those dollars in order to concentrate more and more under this irrational more is better kind of model. So having access to the technology, the more people who come to understand and work with and play with and create with this, the better off we will be. That old saying, talent is pretty evenly distributed, but opportunity is not, right? Mm-hmm. Poor people are as creative as rich people. They haven't had the opportunity to do things with it. And they understand some things about relationships, perhaps, that some rich folks don't. So I would like to have more poor people have access to these technologies as opposed to more rich people have access, because I think we'll see some more things manifest from it. So the masses will have a say in the development of a lot of these technologies, including some of the artificial intelligence, when we're not just trying to scrape the knowledge of humanity in order to replicate a certain class of things, but we're actually building and innovative in new areas. And we can share our own practices with each other and use computers as tools and augmentation for that, which is our own internal AI, if you will. And it doesn't have to be this energy sucking, planet destroying model. It's fascinating to see the way that technology developed, but to me, that's one of the most ridiculous things I've seen in my lifetime. But we have the ability to use the computational augmentation in effective ways for what we're doing, I think in very powerful ways. So I think we can have the masses can have a say in how they use the technology, although they don't have a say in how other people use the technology. But if we become more dependent on ourselves and less dependent on them, then it makes less of a difference what they're doing with the technology, as long as they don't destroy the planet in the process. That's my response to it.
Let me add on to that, just for the sake of the audience and what we've been trying to do with this series. I want to, number one, point folks to a resource, and that's Countering the Fabrication Divide, written by myself and my brother Jossie Williams, that you can find on the Cooperation Jackson website, and I'll put it out on our social media channels so folks could have that as a resource. But one of the pieces within the People's Network for Land and Liberation that we are doing is pulling together our kind of paltry resources so that we can set up community production centers in the 6 nodes. And we didn't go over that, but I'll just mention them briefly. That's Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Community Movement Builders in Atlanta, Georgia, Wellspring Cooperative Corporation in Western Massachusetts, Springfield, in particular, Cooperation Vermont in Marshfield, Vermont, but operating on a broader scale throughout the state. Native Roots Network, which is primarily based in Redding, California, but operating in a broader range in Northern California. And then there are the Merrymakers and Insight Focus primarily based out of Idlewild, Michigan, of which Blair is a representative of. And we've pulled some resources together. We've done joint fundraising together so that we can set up these community production centers as base operations that people in the community, from all various backgrounds can come in, gain access to these technologies and experiment and iterate with them. That is one particular kind of initial step of gaining access and providing access with the resources that we have. So number one, whatever organization that you may belong to or kind of collective you may belong to, there's an organizing component to this that you have to kind of start by pooling resources together and making a concrete determination to kind of create the space and create the processes and the practice to open this up so people in the community have access to it and then find collective ways in your context so that there could be some collective governance or co-governance. So that's one particular way that we know we deliberately have to kind of structure access so that we can have the masses begin to utilize these tools and this technology and to learn this so that we can grow and get more direction to where this is going to our benefit. And we're going to have to replicate that, right? Part of the whole piece of this is sharing this perspective is to get all of you who are listening to consider, combining all of these building blocks together so that we have some aggregated power to be able to be a transformative force collectively in creating a new mode of production. So that's a critical piece we want to kind of put out there. The other kind of component that why I'm raising this issue, another question I got about finance. We have to demand more of ourselves and the institutions that's supposed to speak to our collective interests as working class people and oppressed people. And I'd just like to highlight one particular iteration of that we called for. Within our particular framework around Cooperation Jackson, we've been calling for these union cooperative collaborations. And one of the things we really want to push our different forces within the kind of the union world is to utilize the collective resources that they have amassed, particularly over the last 70 years, but like pension funds, investment funds, that those need to be reinvested into the actual productive capacity of the working class in our communities themselves. And this is one particular way in which they can help us all collectively get a leg up is by investing in and creating our own broad network of community production centers through their own investments and pooling those resources so that it became much more available in our community and start driving what we produce as opposed to just working for employers who tell us what to produce and how to use it, how to sell it, what its value is, etc. We need to flip that paradigm. But that's an internal struggle that we have to raise in our organizing work in our community. So I just want to cite that is a kind of two sets of concrete examples of how we can and I think must approach this so this becomes much more accessible. Blair, we can talk for hours on end on this. We always try to keep them within a range of about an hour and a half. And I noticed we're at that hour and a half mark. There was some more questions I want to get to. But Blair, if we could, and it looks like we got part of your picture back up finally.
Yeah, I think he was gone for a minute, but he's back now. I'm going to get on.
Blair, if you could just perhaps leave us with some closing remarks, just a minute or two, and then we're going to do our spiel for both the episode 6, and then try to pull our resources together for those who may be looking at this to make some donation to Cooperation Jackson for us to kind of continue this ongoing series and this work. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Blair, for some closing comments.
Yeah, I was going to ask, but it may not be possible now if the last slide could be put up, but I think.
Oh, I think it is. Tanya, can we put that back up? We want to utilize all the time possible.
So the very last slide in the deck. So this isn't definitely an interplay between people, technology, and our organizing kind of mechanisms. And so this is kind of to the left is the way we're functioning now, which is that we're all 100% cranking on job work. And our end game is to split that up in a different way, that maybe a third of our time will be spent doing work that's the bottom third, community production, which is us producing things for ourselves and our community, using the leverage of the technology. Another third, which is that new work enterprise, which is that same set of skills that's used to produce things that we may exchange and trade. And then if you model this, you'll have about a third of your time that's not spent cranking away at work or a job, that you can do the things that energize you to want to be you, that get up in the morning and the like. And so I mentioned before, part of this is about creating better people, but I also wanted to leverage on what Kali was just talking about, in that new work enterprises can be part of what we're dealing with. Again, labs can make labs. So if part of our propagation strategy is for the existing labs to help the other labs come on board, then we're not trying to do it to maximize profit. We're trying to do it to propagate the technologies like that we have. And it's a good way for people to apprentice and like along the way. So keep in mind, as you're considering, do we need to raise capital to just buy equipment? As we take another couple steps forward in this, we have the ability to internalize that process. And you can do that in the same way that we may train people who don't have the dollars to pay for the training and have them pay it back when they get the skills by contributing back. Can be a similar kind of deal, in that we can jumpstart somebody else with a set of equipment that we can help make, and then they can pay that back as they get their feet up from under them and kind of keep going. So I would say, think about this broadly in terms of the transformative possibilities in how we organize the relationships, including in the relationship to capital. If we have the ability to create the things that we need, including the equipment, and we're controlling the supply chain, our, again, relationship to capital is a bit different. So, I would say that, this is merely an accelerant in the process of doing things that are sensible under the political analysis. But it's an important accelerant, because if we're trying to fight in the existing system under existing rules, there really isn't a winning set of plays. So I think this gives us an option to actually have the leverage to do the things that we want to do, but we're going to have to kind of put forward that level of discipline and political analysis and organizational strategy to utilize these tools in a way that'll actually be productive. So that's my kind of closing thought.
All right, Blair. Want to thank you for taking us on this. I see a lot of people, greatly appreciate it. There's always more in depth to it that we could explore, and we're definitely going to come back and do that in some later dates. Also, just be on the lookout for the launch of the particular series around the different nodes from the People's Network for Land and Liberation, where we'll get a deeper taste of what is actually currently underway in Idlewild, right, and what is going to take place with some of the kind of the newest investment we've collectively made in helping to advance the work up that way. So be on the lookout for that in the rest of the summer and the fall as we go through a process of going through all of what we're calling our nodes with the six. So be on the lookout for that, because that's a component part of this whole series that we've been doing with Rootwork. So just definitely be on the lookout for that.
Kali, real quick, did you see this question earlier from Michael Nugent regarding what are the ways that a fab lab can be deployed in conjunction with labor unions, community gardens, etc., in a way that begins to meet the needs of, say, a neighborhood like Brownsville in Brooklyn? He mentioned labor unions. I just wanted to make sure you and Blair saw that.
I missed that, but thanks, Mike. Part of what I'm going to do, we don't, within the hour and a half framework, with I think the collective of knowledge that we've been trying to amass to put this series together and bringing folks like Blair into presentation. We don't have enough time within this framework, fortunately, to kind of explore all of that. But I'll say this, Mike, that the different components that, at least in the framework that I've tried to present, there is a logic to it and there's an ordering to it. And why we did the worker self-organization and worker self-management component before this was to deal with the question of how do we shift the relations of production that currently exist and get workers to begin to take more initiative to give direction to all the different places that folks are currently employed or working by cooperating this and democratizing them as much possible, and then interjecting these new techniques to kind of do some major self-transformation and reducing some of the burdens of labor, right, in the overall sense. So we want these to kind of build. And the piece that I would start with in a neighborhood like yours is where you're at, there are a number of different unions that I think would be amenable to this in the short term if pushed and if organized to do so. But there also may be some that may be counter to this in your area. And I'm thinking particularly, unfortunately, some of the trades, the building trades, that would have to be kind of moved and organized, and some old battles that have been there for a long time would have to be, I think, won on new grounds that we need to organize. But the building components, the building blocks of this, of what I think could be are really the transformative elements, and how they have to work in coordination with each other, which Blair also spoke to around the food sovereignty work, whether you want to call it permaculture, agroecology, TEK, etc. That has to be combined, all these different elements, the mutual aid, the food sovereignty, the worker self-organization, the digital fabrication, in the community production. And the next component that we're going to get to, I think, is another critical building block. And that is this, what we're calling the social digital commons, or the social digital infrastructure, which kind of developing all of the tools and techniques that come with like a blockchain and these massive so-called AI or language tools, as Blair was referring to, and subject them and develop them through our own initiative, so that we break the cycle of surveillance and control that are currently used and manipulated by the likes of Twitter or the likes of Amazon, etc., and us creating our own pathways that facilitate the growth of us being able to do many of the things that I saw that Jay Johnson, some in creative experiments, were talking about in terms of how do we access some of the best technology, how do we improve some of the things that are currently out there that were once free that are now charging, in terms of some of the CAD and some of the other tools that we have to put our collective heads together to make them the best tools be available on open source platforms, and know that that is possible. We saw, to cite a reference, some of what the Chinese did earlier with their AI model, and how their investment, which ran, a lot cheaper than what is going on in the United States, and what Trump himself and his movement are now kind of investing in, or claim that they're investing in around AI. They demonstrated it can be done much cheaper, and it can be done utilizing some of the existing technology to work around some of the things that they were trying to impose with the blocking of chips. And so I'm just citing that not as something to lean on, but to demonstrate that our collective capacities of utilizing coordinated, this is an example of how we can work around some of the limitations being imposed upon it deliberately and intentionally by the tech lords in these particular fields. So there are answers. I think we have to pull them, together to get us there, and that's part of what this series is about: is getting all of these different components to be in some dialogue in some coordinated practice with each other, so that we become a much more transformative force. So stay tuned. I would encourage folks to join us for, again, to kind of close us out, for stay tuned and join us on July 8th for the session we're going to be doing about constructing new social digital commons. We're going to have a special guest on that one as well. So be on the lookout for that. Want to thank Blair for joining us and taking out the time and running us through this kind of presentation and sharing his knowledge and experience with us on this critical subject. And we want to encourage all of you to study it further. We will be posting resources throughout the course of the next month on different tools and readings that people can kind of adopt and share in your networks to get people and encourage, those that you're working with to take this up and to look at starting community production centers and linking up, with us in a broader way, through the People's Network for Land and Liberation to kind of take this up and make this innovation our own, right? Seize control of it so we make the world that we want to make and not be subject to the world that they try to impose. And with that, Tande, you want to take us out with some last minute appeals and reminders?
Yes, Blair, I'll be putting your information in the show description later. But real quick, for folks who are listening and watching, give us the website for the work that you are currently involved in, please.
Which is undercover at the moment. So it will be forthcoming.
Can you tell us about the Insight?
Yep. Well, yeah.
Is that undercover also?
Insight-focus.org has some of the old work that we're doing, but it doesn't have the latest generation of work that we are doing.
Okay.
And so sometimes it's useful to stay under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
It stops the opposition.
Mm-hmm. We got you.
Before you kind of get up and going, but it won't be long. Give us within the next 3 months. By the time we get into the fall, we'll have a much fuller description of what we're doing.
All right.
But insightfocus.org has good information on the digital fabrication components, but not the integrated approach within the solidarity economy as it's manifesting in PNLL.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Of course, Kali Akuno and Cooperation Jackson, cooperationjackson.org. This is the Tuesday where we do the build and fight formula. We covered session 5 today on community production. If you look at the bottom of the screen, I have changed the banner to where you can financially support the work of Cooperation Jackson on PayPal and Venmo. See, I took it off of myself, took it off of Black Liberation Media. Hit up Cooperation Jackson with those coins, those ducats, that cheese, that cheddar. Put the money where it needs to go. So again, thank you all so much. Thank you, Blair, for your time. Thank you, Kali, for your time. And thank you, Black Liberation Media and Rootwork audience, chat members, for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe, share, and like. Y'all stay safe out there. And we out.